The thunderous roar shook the windows of the small cabin, causing Abigail James to freeze mid-step, her heart hammering in her chest like a startled Mustang. The wooden ladle slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering against the floor as another growl of thunder rumbled across the Colorado sky. Tears pricked at the corners of her deep brown eyes, her body rigid with a terror as old as her memories. It was the spring of 1878, and Montrose, Colorado was experiencing one of the most violent thunderstorms in recent years. Rain lashed against the cabin's roof with brutal force, each droplet a tiny hammer striking the wooden shingles. Abigail's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she pressed herself against the wall, sliding down until she sat huddled on the rough-hewn floorboards. "Not again," she whispered, covering her ears with shaking hands. At 22 years of age, Abigail James had lived in Montrose for less than a month. She had traveled west from Boston following the death of her parents, armed with nothing but a small inheritance and a letter from her late father's cousin offering her a place to stay. The cousin, an elderly woman named Martha, had passed away just weeks before Abigail's arrival, leaving her alone in an unfamiliar town with no connections and dwindling funds. The small cabin she now occupied had been Martha's, and while the townspeople had been kind enough to allow her to stay there while she established herself, Abigail felt utterly alone, especially during storms like this one. Another crack of thunder split the air, this one so loud and sudden that Abigail cried out, drawing her knees to her chest and burying her face against them. Ever since she was a child, thunderstorms had terrified her beyond reason. When she was 5 years old, lightning had struck a tree outside her bedroom window, sending it crashing through the roof. She had been trapped in her bed, surrounded by broken timber and the deafening sounds of the storm, for hours before she was rescued. The experience had left a wound on her psyche that had never properly healed. A particularly violent gust of wind slammed against the cabin, and Abigail heard something crack outside. The single lantern illuminating the room flickered precariously, threatening to plunge her into darkness. The thought of being alone in the dark during the storm was too much to bear, and a desperate sob escaped her lips. Then, suddenly, there was a pounding at her door different from the thunder, more purposeful and steady. Abigail froze, her tears momentarily forgotten as fear of a different kind washed over her. "Hello, anyone in there?" A deep voice called, barely audible over the storm's fury. Abigail remained silent, uncertain. "Your chimney's damaged," the voice continued. "I saw the top section come loose. You need to get out before it collapses." Self-preservation overrode Abigail's fear of strangers. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing a shawl from a nearby hook and wrapping it around her shoulders. Her hands shook violently as she approached the door, and it took 3 attempts before she managed to slide the bolt free. The moment she cracked the door open, the wind caught it, throwing it wide. Standing on her porch, dripping with rain and illuminated by a flash of lightning, was a tall man in a drenched duster coat and wide-brimmed hat. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but Abigail could see he was roughly hewn, with a strong jaw covered in stubble and piercing eyes that assessed her quickly. "Madam, your chimney's coming apart. It ain't safe here." He gestured upward, but Abigail couldn't bring herself to look, her entire body trembling as another thunderclap shook the earth. The man's expression changed, softening as he recognized the terror in her eyes. "Name's Adam Reeves," he said, his voice gentler now. "I've got a place not far from here, sturdy, safe from the storm." A crash from above punctuated his statement as a portion of the chimney gave way, sending bricks tumbling down the roof. Abigail jumped, a small cry escaping her lips, and the man Adam reacted instinctively. He stepped into the cabin, his presence immediately filling the small space. "What do you need to take with you?" "We've got to move quickly," he said, glancing around the sparse interior. Abigail pointed wordlessly to a small trunk in the corner. My parents' things," she managed to stammer. "And the box on the table. My money." Adam nodded, striding to the trunk and hefting it easily. "Grab the box and anything else you can't leave behind. We've got about 2 minutes before more of that chimney comes down." As if to emphasize his point, another brick crashed onto the porch outside. Abigail snatched the small wooden box containing her remaining funds and a locket with her parents' portraits. She hesitated, looking around the cabin that, while not truly hers, was all she had. "The rest can be replaced," Adam said quietly, reading her thoughts. "Your life can't." Abigail nodded, taking a deep breath as she prepared to step out into the storm. The mere thought made her limbs lock with fear. Adam saw her hesitation and put down the trunk. Without a word, he removed his duster and draped it over her shoulders. It was wet on the outside but somehow still warm, and it enveloped her completely, the sleeves hanging well past her fingertips. "I'm going to carry the trunk. Can you hold onto my arm?" he asked, his voice steady and calm despite the chaos around them. Abigail nodded, clutching the wooden box to her chest with one hand while the other gripped Adam's offered arm. His forearm was solid beneath the rolled-up sleeve of his shirt, the muscles tense as he balanced the trunk against his hip. "Ready?" he asked. She wasn't, not at all, but she nodded anyway. They stepped out into the storm together, and immediately the wind tried to tear them apart. Abigail clung to Adam's arm, her fingers digging into his flesh as lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the landscape in stark, terrifying detail. Rain pelted them mercilessly, soaking through her dress in seconds despite the protection of Adam's coat. Thunder boomed directly overhead, and Abigail faltered, her knees threatening to give out. Adam dropped the trunk and wrapped his arm around her waist, supporting her weight effortlessly. "Almost there," he said, though Abigail knew it couldn't be true. She'd never seen him before in Montrose, and the nearest neighbor was at least a quarter-mile away. They trudged through the mud, the weight of her sodden skirts making each step a struggle. Lightning continued to flash, the thunder following almost immediately, telling Abigail they were in the heart of the storm. Each crack sent a fresh wave of terror through her body, but Adam's solid presence beside her kept her moving forward. After what seemed like an eternity but couldn't have been more than 10 minutes, a structure loomed before them, a small but solid-looking cabin with light glowing from its windows. Unlike Abigail's borrowed home, this one was built with care, the logs fitted tightly together, the roof new and solid. Adam guided her up the 3 steps to the covered porch, setting the trunk down to open the door. Warm air washed over them as they entered, and Abigail almost wept with relief to be out of the storm. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, a cheerful fire crackling within. A solid wooden table and chairs sat in the center of the main room, while a curtain partially concealed a bed in the corner. Various tools of a cowboy's trade hung neatly on the wall's lariats, bits and bridles, and a well-maintained saddle on a stand. Adam closed the door behind them, shutting out the worst of the storm's noise, though the thunder still rumbled, muted but present. Abigail stood dripping on the plank floor, Adam's coat hanging heavily from her shoulders, her entire body shaking partly from cold, mostly from fear. "Let me take that," Adam said gently, helping her remove the sodden duster. He hung it on a peg by the door, then turned to a chest, retrieving a blanket which he draped around her shoulders. "Sit by the fire. I'll make some coffee." Abigail moved woodenly to the hearth, sinking down onto a braided rug before the flames. The heat began to penetrate her wet clothing, but it did nothing to calm the trembling that overtook her each time thunder rolled across the sky. Adam moved efficiently around the small space, putting a pot of coffee on the hook over the fire, then disappearing behind the curtain, returning with a folded bundle of clothing. "These belong to my sister," he explained, offering them to Abigail. "She's about your size. You should change before you catch your death." Abigail took the clothes with numb fingers. "Your sister?" she asked, finding her voice at last. "Does she live nearby?" A shadow crossed Adam's face. "No, madam. She passed on 2 years ago. Fever took her." "I'm sorry," Abigail whispered, clutching the dry clothes to her chest. "And thank you, Mr. Reeves." "Adam," he corrected, a slight smile softening his weathered features. "Nobody calls me Mr. Reeves except the banker, and that's only when he's trying to deny me a loan." A particularly loud crack of thunder made Abigail jump, nearly dropping the clothes. Adam pretended not to notice, turning instead to retrieve 2 tin cups from a shelf. "You can change behind that curtain," he said, nodding toward the sleeping area. "I'll pour the coffee when it's ready." Abigail rose on unsteady legs and made her way to the curtained alcove. The bed was neatly made with a colorful quilt, and a small table beside it held a Bible and what looked like a carved wooden horse. The simplicity and orderliness of the space spoke of a man who took pride in his home, humble though it was. She changed quickly, grateful to be rid of her wet clothes. The dress Adam had provided was simple, a faded blue calico with small flowers embroidered around the collar. It was a bit loose in the bodice, but otherwise fit well enough. She hung her wet garments on a peg, using a small towel folded on the washstand to dry her hair as best she could. When she emerged from behind the curtain, Adam was seated at the table, 2 steaming cups before him. He looked up as she approached, his eyes widening slightly before he quickly averted his gaze. "The dress suits you," he said, clearing his throat. "Sarah always looked pretty in blue." "Sarah was your sister?" Abigail asked, taking the seat across from him. Adam nodded, pushing one of the cups toward her. "Twin, actually. 2 minutes older and never let me forget it." Abigail wrapped her fingers around the warm cup, drawing comfort from its heat. "You're from Montrose. I don't believe I've seen you in town." "Got a small spread about 3 miles north," Adam explained. "Run about 30 head of cattle. Not much, but it's mine. I don't make it into town often, maybe once a month for supplies. I was heading back when the storm hit. Saw the chimney on your place start to go and figured nobody should be inside when it came down." Thunder rumbled again, and Abigail's hand jerked, spilling coffee onto the table. Adam quickly grabbed a cloth and mopped up the spill, his movements efficient but gentle. "Storm's moving east," he said conversationally. "Should pass in an hour or so." Abigail nodded, her throat tight. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've never been, I can't seem to." "No need to explain," Adam interrupted kindly. "My pa was the same way about snakes. Bravest man I ever knew, but show him a rattler and he'd climb the nearest tree faster than a squirrel." A small, surprised laugh escaped Abigail's lips, though it caught on a sob when lightning flashed outside, illuminating the cabin through the small windows. Adam watched her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "When I was a boy," he began, his voice low and steady, "my grandfather taught me to count the seconds between the lightning and the thunder. The more seconds, the further away the storm. Want to try?" Abigail looked up, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. His eyes were a startling blue, like the Colorado sky on a clear day, and filled with a kindness she hadn't expected. Her words were cut off by another flash of lightning. Adam held up a finger. 1, 2, 3, he counted steadily. Thunder followed, not as loud as before. See, 3 seconds. That means the heart of the storm is moving away from us. Abigail managed a small nod, her hands still trembling around the coffee cup. Adam rose from his chair and moved to a trunk in the corner. He returned with a deck of cards. My grandfather also taught me that the best way to wait out a storm is to keep your mind occupied, he said, shuffling the deck with practiced ease. Do you play poker, miss? I just realized I never asked your name. Abigail, she said. Abigail James, and no, I don't play poker. My father would have been scandalized. A small smile touched her lips at the memory of her straight-laced father. Adam chuckled. What about rummy then? Or we could start with something simpler like go fish. Rummy, Abigail decided, grateful for the distraction. I used to play with my mother. Adam dealt the cards and they began to play. The simple act of concentrating on the game did indeed help take Abigail's mind off the storm, though she still flinched at the louder thunderclaps. Adam kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling her about his small ranch, the town of Montrose as he knew it, and occasionally sharing stories of growing up with his sister Sarah. She was the one with all the book learning, he said, laying down a run of spades. Could recite poetry for hours. Me, I was always better with my hands, building, fixing, working with animals. Is that how you became a cowboy? Abigail asked, discarding a card. Adam smiled ruefully. I don't know if I'd call myself a proper cowboy. Just a man with a small piece of land and some cattle. I did my share of droving when I was younger, worked on some of the bigger spreads up north. But after Sarah took sick, I wanted a place of my own, somewhere I could put down roots. Abigail nodded, understanding. I came west hoping for the same, a fresh start. Adam studied her for a moment, his expression curious. What brought you to Montrose specifically? It's not exactly a bustling metropolis. Abigail explained about her cousin Martha and the unfortunate timing of her arrival. The people in town have been kind, letting me stay in Martha's cabin while I find my feet. I've been taking in sewing to earn money, but it's not enough. Not yet. Adam nodded thoughtfully. Martha Willoughby was your cousin. She was a good woman, made the best apple pies in the county. I wouldn't know, Abigail said sadly. I never got to meet her. The conversation lulled as they continued their game. Outside, the storm was indeed moving away, the thunder becoming more distant, the rain lessening to a steady patter rather than the driving force it had been earlier. Abigail began to relax slightly, though tension still held her shoulders rigid. They played several hands, with Adam winning most but Abigail holding her own. As they were starting another round, a particularly bright flash of lightning was followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that shook the cabin. Abigail cried out, cards scattering as she covered her ears, her eyes squeezing shut as terror washed over her anew. She was vaguely aware of Adam moving, and then strong arms were around her, guiding her to a chair by the fire. He sat beside her, one arm still around her shoulders, his voice a steady, calming presence. It's all right, he was saying. That was just a stray bolt, probably hit a tree nearby. The worst is past, I promise. Abigail couldn't stop the tears that flowed down her cheeks, ashamed of her weakness but powerless to control it. I'm sorry, she gasped between sobs. I don't know why. I've always been like this, ever since I was a child. Adam didn't shush her or tell her not to cry. He simply held her, his arm a warm weight across her shoulders, grounding her. After a while, he began to speak, his voice low and melodic. When I was about 10 years old, my pa took Sarah and me fishing at a creek not far from here. It was a beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky when we set out. But in these mountains, weather can change faster than a card sharp's deal. A storm blew in out of nowhere, not unlike this one. Abigail's sobs quieted as she listened, though tears still streamed down her face. We were too far from home to make it back before the storm hit, so Pa found a small cave in the hillside. It wasn't much, just a shallow depression really, but it kept the worst of the rain off. Sarah was terrified not of the thunder, but of being trapped, of the cave collapsing on us. Adam's voice took on a distant quality, as if he were seeing it all again. Pa held her the whole time, singing old trail songs to drown out the thunder. I remember being amazed that my sister, who was always so brave about everything else, could be so frightened by something that couldn't hurt her. He looked down at Abigail, his blue eyes serious. But that's the thing about fear, it doesn't follow logic. Sarah couldn't help being scared of small spaces any more than you can help being afraid of thunder. Abigail wiped at her tears with trembling fingers. Did she ever? Did she get over it? Adam shook his head. Not really, but she learned to live with it. That's all any of us can do with the things that scare us: acknowledge them, face them when we must, and find ways to endure them. Another rumble of thunder sounded, much more distant now, but Abigail still tensed. Adam's arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. "It's moving away," he assured her. "We can count again if you like." Abigail nodded, and together they counted the seconds until the thunder followed the next flash of lightning. 8 seconds this time. The storm was definitely receding. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire. Abigail gradually became aware of the impropriety of their position, a young, unmarried woman alone in a man's cabin, sitting so close beside him. In Boston, such a situation would have been scandalous. But they weren't in Boston, and Adam had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. Still, she reluctantly pulled away, straightening her shoulders. "I should probably try to get back to my cabin," she said, though the thought of returning to the damaged structure filled her with dread. Adam shook his head firmly. "Not tonight. That chimney was in bad shape, and there could be other damage we couldn't see in the dark. First light tomorrow I'll ride over and assess it properly. Tonight you'll stay here." Seeing her hesitation, he added, "I'll sleep in the barn. There's a small loft there with a cot. The bed here is yours." "I couldn't put you out of your home," Abigail protested. "You're not putting me out," Adam assured her. "I've slept in far worse places than my own barn. Besides, there's still a chance of more storms tonight. Better you're somewhere solid." As if to punctuate his statement, the wind gusted against the cabin, whistling through a small crack in one of the windows. Abigail shivered, not from cold but from the thought of being alone in her damaged cabin if another storm hit. "Thank you," she said finally. "You've been very kind to a stranger." Adam smiled, the expression warming his weathered face. "We don't have much out here, but we look after each other. That's the way of things in the West." He rose from his seat beside her. "Are you hungry? I've got some stew left from earlier." "Nothing fancy, but it's filling." Abigail realized she hadn't eaten since noon, and her stomach growled in response. Adam chuckled and moved to the small stove in the corner, where he ladled stew from a pot into a bowl. They ate at the table, the simple meal of venison stew and corn bread surprisingly delicious. Adam was easy to talk to, asking questions about Boston and her life before coming west, sharing stories of his own experiences in return. By the time they finished eating, the storm had passed entirely, leaving only the gentle patter of residual raindrops on the roof. "I'll head out to the barn now," Adam said, gathering their dishes and placing them in a basin. "There's water in the pitcher by the bed if you need it." "I'll be close by if another storm comes." Abigail nodded gratefully. "Thank you again, Adam, for everything." He tipped his head in acknowledgement, then took a lantern and his duster from the peg by the door. "Sleep well, Miss James." "Abigail," she corrected softly, Please call me Abigail." A small smile touched his lips. "Abigail, then. Good night." After he left, Abigail sat by the fire for a long time, listening to the diminishing rain and reflecting on the strange turn her day had taken. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she made her way to the curtained alcove. The bed was comfortable, the sheets clean and smelling faintly of lavender. Despite the lingering anxiety from the storm and the unfamiliar surroundings, she fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. She awoke to sunlight streaming through the small window beside the bed. For a moment she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her sleep-fogged mind. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back: the storm, the damaged chimney, Adam's rescue. Abigail sat up, pushing back the quilt. Her own clothes were still damp, so she remained in Sarah's dress as she emerged from behind the curtain. The main room was empty, but a fire crackled in the hearth, and a pot of coffee sat warming on the stove. A note lay on the table, written in a surprisingly neat hand. "Gone to check your cabin. Coffee's hot. Help yourself to anything you need." Abigail poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, considering her situation. She had come to Montrose with dreams of independence, of building a new life for herself away from the painful memories of losing both parents within months of each other. Now, barely a month into her new beginning, her temporary home was damaged, her meager savings dwindling, and she found herself dependent on the kindness of a stranger with kind blue eyes and gentle hands. Her mind added unbidden. The sound of hoofbeats outside pulled her from her thoughts. Moments later, the door opened and Adam stepped in, removing his hat as he entered. His expression was grim, and Abigail's heart sank. "It's not good news, is it?" she asked. Adam shook his head, hanging his hat on a peg. "The chimney's completely collapsed, took part of the roof with it. Rain's damaged a good portion of the interior. It's fixable, but not quickly." He met her gaze directly. "I'm sorry." Abigail nodded, fighting back tears. It wasn't really her home, she reminded herself, just a temporary shelter. Still, the loss hit hard. "I suppose I'll need to find a room in town," she said, trying to sound practical rather than desperate. "Do you know if Mrs. Holloway still takes boarders? The seamstress mentioned her when I first arrived." Adam poured himself a cup of coffee, his expression thoughtful. "She does, but her rates are steep, and from what you said last night, you're watching your pennies." He took a seat across from her, his hands wrapped around his cup. "I have a proposition for you if you're willing to hear it." Abigail tensed slightly, her Boston upbringing automatically suspicious of propositions from men. But Adam's expression remained open and earnest. "I've been thinking about this since dawn," he continued. "I've got a small house, as you can see, but there's a second cabin on my property about 100 yards from here. It was the original homestead, built by the man who claimed this land. It's not much, just one room, but it's solid, and the roof doesn't leak. I use it for storage mostly, but it could be cleaned up, made habitable." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee before continuing. "You said you take in sewing. I happen to be in need of someone with needle skills. My clothes are all patches upon patches, and I never was handy with a needle. Plus, there's always mending to be done around a ranch: saddle, blankets, grain sacks, all manner of things. I could offer you the cabin and a small wage in exchange for your skills." Abigail stared at him, processing his words. "You're offering me a job and a place to live?" Adam nodded. "It wouldn't be much in the way of pay, but you'd have a roof over your head and I can provide meals. The cabin would give you privacy, your own space. And when the town settles on what to do with your cousin's place, or when you've saved enough to move on if that's your preference, there'd be no obligation to stay." It was a generous offer, far more than she had any right to expect from someone she'd met just hours earlier. But caution made her hesitate. "That's very kind, but we hardly know each other, and people might talk. A single woman living on a bachelor's property." Adam's expression remained steady. "People always talk, but I've lived in these parts for 15 years and most folks know my character." "As for not knowing each other, that's true. But I'm a simple man, Abigail. What you see is what you get. I've never raised my hand to a woman, I don't drink to excess, and I believe in dealing fairly with others." He leaned forward slightly. "The offer is genuine, no strings attached. And if at any point you feel uncomfortable, you can leave, no questions asked." Abigail considered her options. They were, in truth, limited. Her savings wouldn't last long if she had to pay for a boarding house, and her sewing income was inconsistent at best. Adam seemed sincere, and something in her, some instinct she couldn't name, trusted him. "May I see the cabin first?" she asked finally. Relief flickered across Adam's face. "Of course. Let me finish this coffee and I'll show you around the whole property." After breakfast, a simple but hearty meal of flapjacks and bacon, Adam gave Abigail a tour of his ranch. It was modest but well-maintained, with a small barn housing 2 horses, a milk cow, and a variety of chickens pecking in the yard. A corral held 3 more horses, and in the distance, Abigail could see cattle grazing on the rolling hillsides. The second cabin stood in a grove of cottonwood trees, sheltered from the worst of the elements. It was smaller than Adam's home, but, as he had said, solidly built. Inside was crowded with crates and tools, but Abigail could see the potential. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows on 3 sides would provide ample light. "It needs a good cleaning," Adam admitted, "and some of the chinking between the logs needs replacing. But the roof is sound. I replaced it last summer, and the fireplace draws well. There's a small stream just beyond those trees where you can fetch water." Abigail walked the perimeter of the cabin, noting the sturdy construction and the pleasant location. The thought of having her own space, away from the charity of townspeople who barely knew her, was appealing. And the work Adam offered seemed fair and within her abilities. "How soon could it be ready?" she asked, her decision already made. Adam's face brightened. "A day or 2 to clear out my things and make repairs, 3 at most." "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Reeves," Abigail said formally, extending her hand. "Thank you." Adam took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Adam," he corrected with a smile. "If we're to be neighbors, let's not stand on ceremony." They shook on their arrangement, and Abigail felt, for the first time since arriving in Montrose, that perhaps things would work out after all. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity. Adam drove Abigail into town to collect what could be salvaged from her cousin's cabin, which wasn't much, though thankfully her trunk of personal belongings had been protected from the worst of the rain. While they were there, Abigail explained her situation to Mrs. Peabody, the town's unofficial matriarch, who had been instrumental in allowing her to stay in Martha's cabin. "Adam Reeves, eh?" Mrs. Peabody said, eyeing the cowboy who was loading Abigail's trunk onto his wagon. "Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Quieter than most men, keeps to himself mostly, but honest as the day is long. You could do worse for an employer, my dear." The older woman's approval eased the last of Abigail's reservations. Still, she was careful to explain that she would have her own cabin and that the arrangement was strictly business. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Peabody said with a knowing smile that Abigail chose to ignore. Back at the ranch, Adam worked tirelessly to prepare the cabin, enlisting Abigail's help with cleaning while he handled the more physical repairs. By the 3rd day, the small structure had been transformed. The single room was clean and orderly, with Abigail's trunk at the foot of a narrow bed Adam had moved from his own cabin. A table and chair stood by the window, and shelves along one wall held her few belongings. A braided rug, another of Sarah's possessions, Adam had explained, covered part of the wooden floor, adding warmth to the simple space. "It's perfect," Abigail said, surveying her new home with satisfaction. "I can't thank you enough." Adam stood in the doorway, a pleased expression on his face. "You've done most of the work yourself. I just provided the space." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else. Wait here." He disappeared, returning moments later with something hidden behind his back. "Close your eyes and hold out your hands," he instructed, a boyish grin lighting his features. Intrigued, Abigail did as he asked. Something cool and metallic was placed in her palms. Opening her eyes, she found herself holding a small brass bell. "It's not much," Adam said, suddenly looking self-conscious. "But I thought, if there's a storm or if you need anything at all, you can ring it. I'll hear it from my place and come right away." The simple gesture touched Abigail deeply. This man, who barely knew her, had thought about her fear and had found a way to offer comfort without making her feel weak or dependent. She blinked back unexpected tears. "Thank you," she said softly. "It means more than I can say." Adam nodded, clearly uncomfortable with her emotion. "Well, I'll let you get settled. Supper's at sundown if you want to join me. Nothing fancy, but there's plenty." He left, and Abigail spent the remaining daylight arranging her few possessions to make the cabin feel like home. As she worked, she reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place. A devastating storm had led her to lose one home but gain another, and perhaps a friend as well. That evening, she joined Adam for supper in his cabin. The meal was simple but delicious rabbit stew with dumplings, followed by canned peaches for dessert. Afterward, Adam brought out his sister's checkerboard, and they played several games, their conversation flowing easily. "I've been meaning to ask," Abigail said as she considered her next move. "Why were you in town last night? You said you only go in once a month, but it's barely been a week since I last saw you there." Adam shifted in his chair, his eyes on the board. "Needed some supplies for a project I'm working on, a new corral for breaking horses." Something in his tone made Abigail look up sharply. "You're not telling me the whole truth," she said, surprised by her own boldness. Adam met her gaze, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. "You're perceptive." "Truth is, I saw you in town last time. Asked Tom at the general store about you. He mentioned you were staying alone in Martha's cabin. With the storm coming, I was concerned." The admission sent a curious warmth through Abigail's chest. "You rode into town specifically to check on me." Adam shrugged, visibly uncomfortable. Just being neighborly. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. In a land where people often lived miles apart, looking out for strangers wasn't a common occurrence, especially when it meant riding through a brewing storm. "Well, I'm grateful you did," Abigail said simply, moving her checker piece and deliberately changing the subject. "Your move." The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Abigail spent her mornings doing the mending. Adam provided everything from torn shirts to saddle blankets. In the afternoons, she continued to take in sewing from townspeople, making occasional trips into Montrose with Adam when he went for supplies. The arrangement worked well. Adam was true to his word about fair pay, and Abigail found that she enjoyed the quiet of ranch life more than she had expected. There was just one problem: the weather. Spring in Colorado was unpredictable, with thunderstorms a common occurrence. The first storm after Abigail moved to the cabin caught her in the middle of the night. She woke to the rumble of distant thunder, immediately rigid with fear. The small cabin suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed to the elements in a way that terrified her. Without thinking, she grabbed the brass bell Adam had given her and rang it, the clear sound piercing the night. Moments later, she heard the sound of running footsteps, and then Adam was at her door, hair tousled from sleep, wearing only trousers hastily pulled on. "What's wrong?" he asked, breathing hard, clearly prepared for some emergency. Abigail stood in her nightgown and wrapper, the bell still clutched in her hand, mortification washing over her as she realized she had summoned him for nothing more than her own irrational fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The thunder. I panicked. I shouldn't have. Please go back to bed." "I'm fine." But another rumble of thunder belied her words, making her flinch visibly. Adam's expression softened with understanding. "May I come in?" he asked gently. Abigail nodded, stepping back to allow him entry. Adam moved to the fireplace, adding wood to the banked coals and stirring them until flames leapt up, casting a warm glow throughout the small space. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the bed. "I'll make us some tea." He moved with easy familiarity, finding the kettle and filling it from the water bucket, then setting it over the fire. Abigail watched him, embarrassment gradually giving way to gratitude for his matter-of-fact acceptance of her fear. "I'm sorry I woke you," she said again. Adam shook his head. "That's what the bell is for. I meant what I said any time you need help, day or night." The storm grew closer, thunder rumbling more frequently. Each time Abigail tensed, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her wrapper. Adam noticed, but didn't comment, simply continuing to prepare the tea as if it were the middle of the afternoon rather than the dead of night. When the first flash of lightning illuminated the cabin, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder, Abigail couldn't contain a small cry of fear. Adam was beside her instantly, sitting on the edge of the bed, one arm around her shoulders. "It's all right," he said, his voice steady. "Just a storm. It can't hurt you in here." But logic had no place in Abigail's terror. Her entire body trembled and tears leaked from the corners of her tightly shut eyes. Adam hesitated only a moment before pulling her closer, his arm secure around her. "When I was driving cattle up in Wyoming," he began, his voice deliberately calm, "we got caught in a storm that made this one look like a spring shower. Lightning was striking all around us, and the herd started to stampede." Despite her fear, Abigail found herself listening, drawn into his story. "My horse was struck," Adam continued, "not directly but close enough to send us both tumbling. I thought for sure that was the end, either the lightning would get me, or I'd be trampled by 2,000 terrified longhorns." Another crack of thunder made Abigail jump, and Adam's arm tightened slightly. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Old Pete, the trail boss, rode into that chaos and dragged me out. Never saw a man with more grit. He had this saying, 'Fear's just your body telling you you're alive. Acknowledge it, then get on with living.'" Abigail opened her eyes, looking up at Adam's profile illuminated by the fire. "Is that what you do? Acknowledge it and move on?" Adam smiled slightly. "Try to, don't always succeed, but it helps to remember that storms pass. Everything passes eventually." They sat like that for hours, Adam's arm around her shoulders, his deep voice spinning tales of his life on the range, of cattle drives and wild horses, of the characters he'd met along the way. Gradually, the thunder grew more distant, the lightning less frequent. Abigail's trembling subsided, though she remained nestled against Adam's side, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Eventually, the storm passed entirely, leaving only the soft patter of rain on the roof. Abigail realized with a start that her head was resting against Adam's chest, her body curled trustingly against his. She straightened, heat rising in her cheeks. Thank you, she said, unable to meet his eyes, for staying with me. Adam stood, moving to check on the forgotten tea, which had long since gone cold. No need for thanks. That's what neighbors are for. There was something in his voice that Abigail couldn't quite identify, a warmth, perhaps, or a hint of reluctance as he prepared to leave. "Would you like me to build up the fire before I go?" he asked, his back to her as he rinsed the unused cups. "No, thank you. I'll be fine now that the storm has passed." Abigail pulled her wrapper more tightly around herself, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation, her in her nightclothes, him shirtless, alone in her cabin in the middle of the night. Adam seemed to realize it too, for he moved toward the door with deliberate casualness. "If you're sure you're all right." "I am, truly," he nodded, his hand on the door latch. "Good night, then. Ring if you need anything else." After he left, Abigail sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, staring into the fire and thinking about the cowboy, who had held her through the storm without judgment or complaint. The pattern was established that night. Whenever a storm blew in, Adam would appear at Abigail's cabin, sometimes in response to her bell, sometimes simply sensing her need. He would build up her fire, make tea or coffee, and sit with her until the storm passed, sometimes talking, sometimes reading aloud from one of his small collection of books, but always providing the comfort of his presence. Abigail tried not to need him. She told herself it was childish to be so frightened, that she was imposing on his kindness. But the terror was real and overwhelming, and Adam never seemed to mind. He never made her feel weak or foolish, never suggested that she should overcome her fear through sheer will. He simply accepted it as part of who she was and offered what comfort he could. Spring turned to summer, and Abigail's life settled into a pleasant routine. Her sewing business grew as word spread of her skill, and she was able to save a small amount each week. The cabin truly felt like home now, decorated with wildflowers she gathered and small touches that reflected her personality. Her relationship with Adam deepened into a comfortable friendship. They ate dinner together most evenings, sharing the cooking duties. Abigail discovered that she enjoyed learning ranch skills, gathering eggs, milking the cow, even helping with the horses under Adam's patient tutelage. For his part, Adam seemed to appreciate having someone to talk to after years of solitude. He smiled more often, Abigail noticed, the lines around his eyes crinkling in a way that made her heart beat a little faster. In town, people began to regard them as a pair, addressing queries about one to the other. Mrs. Peabody watched their interactions with knowing eyes but kept her observations to herself. Abigail was aware of the gossip. It was inevitable in a small community, but found she didn't mind as much as she had expected. There was, after all, nothing improper about their arrangement. They were neighbors, friends, nothing more. If sometimes she caught Adam looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch, or if her own thoughts occasionally wandered to how it felt to be held in his arms during a storm, well, that was her secret to keep. July brought the hottest weather Abigail had experienced since arriving in Colorado. The days were scorching, the air so dry it seemed to suck the moisture from her skin. Adam worked from dawn until dusk, checking his cattle's water sources, moving them to better grazing grounds, and making repairs to fences and outbuildings. One particularly hot afternoon, Abigail was sitting in the shade of the cottonwoods, mending one of Adam's shirts when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw Adam riding toward the ranch, leading a magnificent black stallion. The wild creature fought against the lead rope, tossing its head and sidling nervously. Adam dismounted in the yard, speaking soothingly to both horses. He spotted Abigail and waved, his face alight with excitement. "Come see what I found," he called. Abigail set aside her sewing and approached cautiously, eyeing the black horse with respect. "He's beautiful," she said, "but he doesn't look too happy about being here." Adam grinned, patting the stallion's sweaty neck. "Found him caught in some old barbed wire on the north ridge. Leg was cut up pretty bad. Had to bring him in to treat him properly." Now that Abigail looked closer, she could see the blood on the horse's right foreleg and the way he favored it. "Poor thing. Will he be all right? With proper care, yes, but I'll need your help. Can you hold my gelding while I get this fellow settled in the corral?" Abigail took the reins of Adam's usual mount, a steady bay gelding named Buck, while Adam carefully led the injured stallion to the corral. The wild horse was skittish, rolling his eyes and snorting at everything, but Adam's calm, confident manner seemed to reassure him. Once the stallion was safely corralled, Adam turned his attention to treating the wound. Abigail watched in admiration as he spoke constantly to the frightened animal, his voice low and soothing, his movements slow and deliberate. Despite the stallion's size and strength, he gradually yielded to Adam's gentle handling, allowing his injured leg to be cleaned and bandaged. "You're good with him," Abigail observed when Adam finally joined her by the water trough, washing the blood from his hands. "I've never seen a wild horse calm down so quickly." Adam shrugged, but she could see he was pleased by the compliment. "They're like people in some ways. They respond to kindness and consistency." He glanced at her, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Also like people, they need to know someone cares when they're scared or hurting." The parallel wasn't lost on Abigail. She felt a rush of warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "Do you think he'll stay once he's healed, or will he go back to the wild?" Adam dried his hands on his bandana, considering the question. "Hard to say. He's young, probably never been handled before today, but there's something in his eye, a curiosity maybe. Could be he'll decide that regular meals and shelter are worth the trade-off of human companionship." He grinned suddenly. "Or he might kick down the corral fence the minute his leg is healed and hightail it back to the hills. What will you name him?" Abigail asked, watching the stallion as he explored his new enclosure, still favoring the injured leg but moving with a natural grace that spoke of power and speed. Adam considered for a moment. "Thunder, I think. He came in with the storm front and he's got a spirit to match." The name made Abigail smile ruefully. "The one thing I'm afraid of. It's fitting, somehow." Adam's expression softened as he looked at her. "Maybe he'll help you see that not all thunder is something to fear." The stallion became a project for both of them over the following weeks. Adam treated the leg wound daily, and Abigail often assisted, gradually gaining the wild horse's trust with offerings of apples and gentle words. To their surprise, Thunder accepted captivity with relative equanimity, showing more curiosity than fear of humans. "He's a smart one," Adam observed one evening as they watched the stallion prance around the corral, his injured leg nearly healed. "Picks things up quickly. Going to make someone a fine mount someday." Abigail leaned against the corral fence, enjoying the cool evening air after another scorching day. "You're not keeping him?" Adam shook his head. "I've got Buck, and the 2 other horses are more than enough for my needs. Besides, a horse like that deserves a special rider, someone who can appreciate his spirit." "Like who?" Abigail asked, curious. Adam looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Maybe you." Abigail laughed in surprise. "Me? I can barely stay on Buck, and he's the most even-tempered horse in Colorado. Thunder would have me on the ground in seconds." "Don't sell yourself short. You've got a good seat and you're learning quickly." Besides, thunder likes you. Have you noticed how he comes to the fence when you approach? That's not just for the apples. Abigail had noticed, but hadn't thought much of it. The idea of riding the magnificent stallion was both terrifying and exhilarating. Even if that were true, I could never afford a horse like him. Adam turned to face her, his expression serious. He's not for sale. He'd be a gift. The simple statement left Abigail speechless. A horse like Thunder was valuable, possibly the most valuable thing Adam owned besides his land. Such a gift went far beyond neighborly kindness or even friendship. Adam, I couldn't possibly, he cut her off with a raised hand. Just think about it. He's not ready to be ridden yet anyway. His leg needs another few weeks to fully heal, and then he'll need proper training. But I think you two would suit each other. Before Abigail could respond, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted their conversation. She tensed automatically, her eyes lifting to the western sky where dark clouds were gathering. "Storm's coming," Adam said unnecessarily. "Looks like it might be a big one." Abigail nodded, her throat suddenly tight. Despite the frequency of summer thunderstorms and Adam's constant reassurance, her fear hadn't diminished. If anything, the anticipation of her own reaction sometimes made it worse. "I should get back to my cabin," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. Adam placed a gentle hand on her arm. "I'll walk you." The air had changed, becoming charged with electricity. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. By the time they reached Abigail's cabin, the first large drops were beginning to fall. "Would you like me to stay?" Adam asked as Abigail lit the lamp inside. It was the first time he had offered before the storm actually hit, before she had rung her bell in panic. Abigail hesitated, torn between pride and fear. Part of her wanted to face this alone, to prove to herself that she could overcome her terror. But the rational part knew that the comfort of Adam's presence made the storms bearable in a way nothing else had. "Please," she said finally, "if you don't mind." Adam stepped inside, removing his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door, a familiar gesture now, one that spoke of the ease that had developed between them. He moved to the fireplace, laying kindling for a small fire despite the summer heat. Abigail knew it was more for the comfort of the light than for warmth. The storm hit in earnest as night fell, one of the most violent of the season. Thunder crashed overhead, lightning turning the night to day in blinding flashes. Rain pounded against the cabin roof and windows with such force that it sounded like a stampede. Abigail sat on her bed, knees drawn to her chest, fighting to control her breathing as terror clawed at her throat. Adam sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. He spoke steadily, telling her about the first horse he had ever trained, a stubborn pinto mare that had bucked him off more times than he could count. Finally figured out she just didn't like the feel of the saddle. Started with just a blanket, got her used to that, then added weight gradually. By the time I put a proper saddle on her, she was fine with it. "Sometimes," he said, glancing at Abigail, "the only way past fear is through it, one small step at a time." A particularly violent thunderclap shook the cabin, and Abigail gasped, instinctively reaching for Adam. He drew her close without hesitation, his arm secure around her shoulders. "I'm here," he said simply. "You're safe." They remained like that for hours, Adam holding her through the worst of the storm, his steady heartbeat under her ear a counterpoint to the chaos outside. As always, he spoke softly of inconsequential things, his deep voice rumbling in his chest, soothing her frayed nerves. Gradually, the storm moved eastward, the thunder becoming more distant, the rain lessening to a gentle patter. Abigail realized she was still nestled against Adam's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. But unlike previous times, she didn't pull away immediately. There was a comfort in his embrace that went beyond mere physical protection, a rightness that she was reluctant to relinquish. "Better?" Adam asked quietly, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. Abigail nodded but still didn't move. "Thank you, again. I don't know what I would do without you during these storms." Adam's arm tightened slightly. "You'd manage. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." The simple statement, delivered with absolute certainty, touched something deep within Abigail. She pulled back slightly to look up at him, wanting to see his face. The fire had burned low, casting the cabin in soft, golden light that emphasized the strong lines of Adam's jaw and the surprising tenderness in his eyes as he gazed down at her. "Adam," she began, though she wasn't sure what she wanted to say. He reached up with his free hand, hesitantly, as if asking permission, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered, tracing the line of her jaw with a touch so gentle it made her breath catch. "Abigail," he said, her name a whisper in the quiet cabin. "I should go." But he didn't move, his eyes still on hers, filled with a question he didn't voice. Abigail knew she should agree, should let him leave as he always did once the storm had passed. It was the proper thing, the safe thing. But in that moment, with the memory of terror still fresh and the comfort of his presence so profound, she couldn't bring herself to be proper or safe. "Stay," she whispered. "Please." The word hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the simple request. Adam's eyes darkened and he swallowed visibly. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough in answer. Abigail leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a tentative kiss, gentle and questioning. Adam responded with equal gentleness, his hand coming up to cradle her face as if she were made of the finest porcelain. When they pulled apart, Abigail saw in Adam's eyes the same wonder she felt, the same recognition that something fundamental had changed between them. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time," Adam admitted, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "Why didn't you?" Abigail asked, breathless. Adam's expression grew serious. "You came here for a fresh start, not to be tied to the first man who offered you shelter." "I didn't want you to feel obligated." The thoughtfulness of his answer only deepened Abigail's growing feelings for him. "There's no obligation," she assured him. "Only gratitude, respect, and—" She hesitated, then decided honesty was called for, and growing affection. Adam's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He leaned forward to kiss her again, more confidently this time, his arms encircling her waist and drawing her closer. Abigail responded in kind, her hands coming up to rest on his broad shoulders, marveling at the solid strength of him. They talked long into the night, sharing hopes and dreams that had remained unspoken during their months of friendship. Adam spoke of his plans for the ranch, his desire to expand his herd and perhaps someday build a larger house. Abigail confessed her own dreams of a home filled with children and love, of using her sewing skills to create beautiful things rather than just practical ones. As dawn approached, Adam reluctantly rose to leave. At the door, he turned back to Abigail, his expression serious. "I meant what I said about thunder being a gift, but I hope you understand now that he comes with strings attached." Abigail tilted her head questioningly. "The strings are me," Adam clarified. "I'm rather attached to the idea of seeing you ride him, of teaching you, of being part of your life in a more permanent way." He took her hand, his calloused thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I don't want to rush you, but I want to be clear about my intentions. I care for you, Abigail, deeply." Abigail's heart swelled with a happiness that was almost painful in its intensity. "I care for you too, and I would be honored to accept both Thunder and his strings." Adam's smile was worth every moment of terror she had endured during the storm. He kissed her once more, tenderly, then stepped out into the dawn light, whistling as he walked back to his cabin. Abigail closed the door and leaned against it, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of Adam's kiss still lingered. Outside, the world was washed clean by the storm, the morning sun glinting on raindrops that clung to leaves and grass. It seemed a fitting metaphor for her own heart cleansed of old fears and uncertainties, ready to embrace a new beginning with the quiet cowboy who had held her through the darkest nights. The following weeks brought a deepening of their relationship and a shift in their daily routines. Adam began courting Abigail properly, taking her into town for Sunday dinners at the hotel restaurant and accompanying her to church services. They rode together in the evenings, Adam patiently teaching Abigail to be more confident on horseback, preparing her for the day when Thunder would be ready for a rider. The stallion's leg healed completely, and Adam began the process of gentling him to the saddle. Abigail watched with admiration as Adam worked with the horse, using the same patience and gentleness he had shown with her fears. "It's about building trust," Adam explained as he gradually accustomed Thunder to the weight of a saddle blanket. "He needs to know that nothing I ask of him will hurt him, that even if something scares him at first, I won't let any harm come to him." Abigail understood the parallel all too well. Adam had done the same for her, creating a safe space where her fear could exist without consuming her. Summer waned, the scorching days giving way to the crisp clarity of early autumn. The aspens on the hillsides turned golden, their leaves shimmering like coins when the breeze stirred them. Abigail's business continued to thrive. She had even begun to create custom dresses for some of the wealthier ladies in Montrose, who were delighted to have access to the latest Eastern fashions without having to travel to Denver. The thunderstorms grew less frequent as the season changed, but they didn't disappear entirely. Each time the skies darkened and thunder rumbled across the mountains, Adam would appear at Abigail's door, sometimes before she even reached for the bell. He held her through each storm, his presence a constant comfort, his arms a sanctuary from her fear. But something had changed. Where once she had been consumed by terror during storms, now Abigail found herself almost anticipating them. Not the fear itself, but the aftermath, the quiet conversations in the firelight, the growing boldness of their kisses, the security of Adam's embrace. "You're trembling less," Adam observed during a late September storm, his arm around her shoulders as they sat on her bed watching the fire. "The thunder still frightens you, but not as much as before." Abigail considered this. It was true. While the crack of thunder still sent fear coursing through her, it no longer paralyzed her completely. "Perhaps I'm getting used to it," she suggested. "Or perhaps I've just found something that scares me more." Adam looked down at her, concerned. "What's that?" Abigail met his gaze steadily. "The thought of a future without you in it." The simple admission hung in the air between them. Adam's expression shifted, vulnerability replacing concern, hope dawning in his blue eyes. "Abigail," he began, then stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I'm not a man of fancy words, never have been, but these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I never expected to find someone who would make this small ranch feel like a real home, who would see value in a simple cowboy with calloused hands and limited prospects." He took her hand in his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I love you. I think I have since that first night, when you stood in Martha's cabin with rain in your hair and terror in your eyes, but still had the courage to follow a stranger into a storm." He drew a deep breath. "I'm asking if you would consider making our arrangement permanent. If you would do me the honor of becoming my wife. Tears filled Abigail's eyes, but for once they had nothing to do with fear. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I would be proud to be your wife." Adam's kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice husky with emotion. "I promise you this: I will hold you through every storm, whether it's thunder in the sky or troubles in our life together. I will never let go until the darkness passes and morning comes." The promise, so simple and yet so profound, brought fresh tears to Abigail's eyes. "And I promise to be strong for you when you need strength, to be your shelter when you need rest, and to love you through all the seasons of our life together." They were married on a crisp October morning, with the mountains ablaze in autumn colors and the sky a perfect, cloudless blue. The ceremony was small, just a handful of townspeople who had become friends. The ceremony performed by Montrose's circuit riding preacher in the town's small church. Abigail wore a dress of ivory silk that she had sewn herself, with tiny pearl buttons down the back that had belonged to her mother. Adam wore a new suit, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the formal attire, but handsome nonetheless. Mrs. Peabody hosted a small reception at her home, where Abigail and Adam were toasted with the good wishes of their neighbors. By mid-afternoon, they were riding back to their ranch now. Abigail thought with a surge of pride and happiness. To her surprise, Adam guided them not to his cabin but to the smaller one where she had been living. "I have something to show you," he explained, helping her dismount. Inside, Abigail found the cabin transformed. The simple furnishings had been rearranged, and new curtains hung at the windows, curtains she recognized as being made from fabric she had admired in the general store but considered too expensive for practical use. "Adam, what?" she began, then stopped as she noticed a new addition to the cabin, a beautiful cradle hand-carved from golden pine, standing in the corner. "I thought perhaps, when the time comes, this might serve as a nursery," Adam explained, watching her reaction carefully. "Our children should have their own space, even if it's small at first, and I know this cabin has become special to you." Tears blurred Abigail's vision as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood of the cradle. "You made this," Adam nodded. "Been working on it at night after you'd gone to bed." "Wanted it to be a surprise." Abigail threw her arms around his neck, overcome with emotion. "It's beautiful, perfect." Adam's arms encircled her waist, drawing her close. "There's one more surprise," he said, leading her back outside. Tethered to the hitching post was Thunder, fully saddled and bridled, his black coat gleaming in the autumn sunlight. He had filled out over the summer, his frame carrying more muscle, his bearing proud and confident. "He's ready," Adam said. "And so are you." Abigail approached the stallion cautiously, though not fearfully. Thunder lowered his head to greet her, nuzzling at her palm in search of the apple treats she often brought him. "Not today, handsome," she laughed. "But if you behave, there will be plenty later." With Adam's assistance, she mounted the stallion, settling into the saddle with more confidence than she would have believed possible a few months earlier. Thunder stood perfectly still until she gathered the reins and gave him the slightest of signals to move forward. Then he stepped out with a fluid grace that took her breath away. "He's amazing," she called to Adam, who watched with unmistakable pride, "like riding a cloud." They spent the afternoon riding together across their ranch. Abigail reminded herself again with a surge of joy. Thunder proved to be everything Adam had promised: spirited but controlled, responsive to the lightest touch, a perfect match for Abigail's growing skills. As the sun began to set, painting the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, they returned to the main cabin. Adam had made improvements there as well. Abigail discovered a new shelf for her books, a comfortable rocking chair by the fire, small touches that transformed the bachelor's quarters into a home for a couple beginning their life together. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Abigail felt a peace she had never known before. The fear that had been her constant companion for so many years seemed distant, overshadowed by the love that surrounded her now. "What are you thinking?" Adam asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Abigail smiled in the darkness. "I was thinking that for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Whatever comes, storms, challenges, joys, we'll face it together." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, his face barely visible in the dim light. "You've given me that gift, Adam, not just shelter from the storms, but the courage to weather them." Adam drew her down for a kiss that spoke of tenderness and passion, of promises kept and promises yet to be fulfilled. "And you've given me a home," he said softly. "Not just a place, but a reason, a purpose beyond just surviving each day." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the first night of many they would spend together in the years to come. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it heavy snows and bitter cold that tested their preparations, but found them ready. The cattle were moved to sheltered pastures. Extra firewood was stacked high against the cabin walls, and the pantry was stocked with preserves Abigail had put up during the abundant harvest season. Christmas was a quiet affair, just the two of them exchanging simple gifts before a roaring fire while the wind howled outside. Adam gave Abigail a pair of silver combs for her hair, ordered specially from Denver. She presented him with a new coat she had made, lined with sheepskin for warmth during his long days checking on the cattle in the snow. As winter deepened, they settled into a rhythm of contentment, finding joy in simple pleasures, reading aloud to each other in the evenings, planning improvements for the ranch in the spring, sharing dreams for their future. And when Abigail discovered in late January that their family would be expanding sooner than they had planned, Adam's expression of wonder and joy was a gift beyond price. The thunder and lightning of spring's first storms found Abigail still fearful but increasingly resilient. Adam held her through each one, his arms a shelter, his love a constant. And on a warm June evening, as a summer storm rolled across the mountains, their son was born, a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. They named him Samuel, after Adam's father, and as Abigail held him in her arms, Adam beside her on the bed, she felt a fierce protectiveness that overshadowed any fear. This child would know security and love, would grow up understanding that while the world held dangers, it also held immeasurable joys. "He's perfect," Adam whispered, one finger caught in his son's tiny fist. "Like his mother." Outside, thunder rumbled, but within the sturdy walls of their cabin, there was only peace and the quiet miracle of new life. Abigail looked up at her husband, her heart so full it seemed it might burst. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Adam smiled, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I'll hold you both through every storm," he promised. "Always." And he did. Through the years that followed, as their family grew with the addition of a daughter 2 years later and another son 2 years after that, Adam remained Abigail's rock, her shelter from the storms, both literal and figurative, that life brought their way. The ranch prospered under their joint care, expanding gradually as Adam acquired additional land and increased his herd. Abigail's sewing business evolved into a small but successful dress shop in Montrose, operated primarily by a young apprentice she had trained, allowing her to split her time between town and the ranch she had come to love. Thunder remained her faithful mount for many years, eventually siring a line of exceptional horses that became known throughout the region for their intelligence and heart. And though Abigail never completely overcame her fear of thunderstorms, she learned to face them with increasing courage, drawing strength from Adam's unwavering support and the love that had transformed both their lives. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children, now grown or nearly so, arranged a surprise celebration, inviting friends and neighbors to the ranch for a day of feasting and fellowship. As evening fell and the guests departed, Abigail and Adam found themselves alone on the porch of the home they had built together, watching the sunset paint the western sky in familiar splendor. "Happy?" Adam asked, his arm around her shoulders, the silver in his hair catching the last rays of sunlight. Abigail leaned into his embrace, thinking of all they had shared, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges, the quiet moments and passionate nights. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a summer storm approaching from the mountains. Abigail felt the old fear stir, but it was a pale shadow of what it once had been. "Sounds like we might be in for a stormy night," Adam observed, his blue eyes warm as they met hers. Abigail smiled, rising to her feet and extending her hand to her husband. "Then I suppose you'd better hold me," she said. "Until morning." Adam took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture as familiar as breathing. "Always," he promised, "through every storm for all our days." And as they walked together into the home they had built with love and perseverance, Abigail knew it was a promise that would never be broken.